The noises outside were too much for Ivy. She pulled the covers over her head. It was so hot under there, and she could hardly breathe, but she didn't care. She knew that whatever was out there was something she must hide from. The discomfort was worth it if her safety was on the line, and just like many other children, she believed being under her blanket was keeping her safe. She thought she would never fall asleep that night, but mercifully, she finally did. With the rising of the sun came the exit of her fear, but she knew night was coming again eventually, and she needed help. She turned to her older sister, Myrtle. "Myrtle," she said, "there were monsters outside last night." "What?" Myrtle replied. Being 7 years older than 6-year-old Ivy, she was no longer afraid of monsters. But she remembered being Ivy's age when she had been. Compassionately, she explained, "Ivy, there's no such thing as monsters. You've got nothing to worry about." Ivy wasn't convinced. "Then what was out there? I heard sounds." "Oh, Ivy, it was probably the wind or nighttime animals." In the past, Myrtle had explained that there were some animals that came out at night, like raccoons and opossums, looking for food. "Okay," Ivy said. She wanted to believe her older sister and thought that she probably should because in the past she had been right so many times. But that night it happened again. And this time the noises were louder and closer. Again, she spent the night under the covers sweating. And again, the next morning, she ran to her sister. And again, her sister assured her that everything was fine. A couple of times over the next week or so, Ivy had been brave enough to crawl to the window when she heard the sounds to see if maybe Myrtle was right. Maybe she would see some nighttime animals. She saw none, but she could still hear the sounds. This went on for a couple of weeks, and Myrtle could see that she was going to have to do more than just talk to Ivy to calm her fears. Let's go outside," she said one afternoon. "You show me where the noises are coming from. Maybe we can find some evidence." So they went outside around the back of the house where Ivy's bedroom window was. Even though it was daylight, Ivy still clung to Myrtle's side, scared that some beast was going to try to snatch her away. "Where do you hear the noises?" she asked. "In my room," Ivy replied. Myrtle laughed. "No, silly, I mean, where do you think the noises are happening out here?" "Probably close to over there." She pointed toward a tree. This particular tree was new to their yard. It was purchased by their father for their mother on her birthday over the summer. It was a hawthorn tree. Myrtle made her way toward the tree. Ivy did not want to go with her, but she also did not want to be left standing alone, unprotected. When they got there, nothing unusual was found. Myrtle didn't think there would be, but she was hoping that coming out here and showing her little sister there was nothing to fear would calm her down. It did not seem to be working. It was plain to see that Ivy believed something was out here at night, and nothing she could do would make her believe otherwise. So she thought she would try a different strategy. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing to the ground around the tree. "Clovers!" Ivy looked, but she wasn't nearly as excited as Myrtle. "Don't you see, Ivy? This makes so much sense. Tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. I bet the noises you're hearing are leprechauns." Myrtle meant for this to ease Ivy's mind, but she could tell by the look in her eyes when she said this that she was getting the opposite result. Apparently, having leprechauns running loose around the backyard at night was not a comforting thought to her. "You don't need to be afraid, Ivy. Leprechauns are nice." But in reality, she didn't know if what she was saying was true in leprechaun folklore or not. She was just trying to make her sister not be afraid to go to sleep at night. "They are?" she asked hopefully. "Yes, and they are lucky. They're probably here to bring you good luck. Let's take a look at these clovers. Do you see how they have 3 leaves on them?" This one doesn't, Ivy said, holding up a 4-leaf clover. Ivy, wow! I don't believe it! And she really couldn't. She had always been told since she was young that once in a while you could find a clover that had 4 leaves. She had always wanted to find one, but she had never been able to. And here was her sister picking a clover for the first time, and wouldn't you know, it was 4-leafed. I guess you're the lucky one around here. Ivy smiled. She was starting to feel better. In time, it seemed that Myrtle's solution had worked. Ivy was no longer afraid to go to sleep at night. In fact, she kind of looked forward to it, believing there were benevolent creatures in her yard wanting to bring her good luck. Myrtle was quite proud of herself, having seemingly helped her sister. But things got weird. Ivy became obsessed with leprechauns. It was all she would talk about for quite a while. She drew pictures of them, she wrote stories about them. She even claimed she had talked with one. What did he say? Myrtle asked, curious to see what Ivy would come up with. You mean, what did she say? Ivy responded. Oh, so your leprechaun is a girl. Yes, said Ivy, matter-of-factly. Her name is Lori. Immediately after saying this, she gasped and put her hands over her mouth. What's wrong? Ivy slowly removed her hands. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone her name. She told me it's a secret. Oh, well, don't worry. I'm good at keeping secrets. So did the leprechaun tell you anything interesting? Like why does she live in our yard? Oh, yes, said Ivy. She told me lots of interesting stuff. Like she thinks she's the last one. She has not seen another leprechaun in a long time, and she's looked all over the place. I see, she said. What happened to all the other leprechauns? There was a terrible war with fairies. All the leprechauns were destroyed except for Lori. She was the princess, and she escaped. Myrtle smiled at her sister's imagination. What she didn't know then was that in the coming days, weeks, months, and years, that smile would fade. At the end of the school year, report cards came out. Ivy's grades were much better than Myrtle's. Myrtle pretended this didn't bother her, but deep down it kind of did. You're the lucky one, I guess, she told her. It seems like your little leprechaun friend is helping you out. Ivy laughed. The next year was even worse. Ivy's grades remained excellent, while Myrtle allowed all of the typical teenage distractions to get in the way of her studies, and her grades were worse than ever. And it wasn't just this. For the next number of years, Myrtle noticed in tortured silence, as it seemed like everything always fell Ivy's way and nothing ever went hers. The leprechaun story was fun in the beginning, but in time she started to wonder if Ivy's leprechaun wasn't just make-believe. She became obsessed. She started doing internet research on leprechauns, and she read numbers of books. She became quite the expert on the legend. This hobby completely consumed all of her free time, and most of the time that she was not free. In her adult life, it actually caused her to lose several jobs because she could not focus on her work. When the girls were in their 40s, Myrtle paid a visit to Ivy's home. Ivy was now married and had 3 children. Their house was nice, much nicer than anywhere Myrtle had ever lived. I need your help, she pleaded with Ivy. Ivy looked concerned. What's wrong? I need to borrow some money for a trip I have to take. Ivy sighed. This wasn't the first time Myrtle had asked her for money. Ivy had lent her money numerous times in the past, and Myrtle had always promised repayment, but that promise had never been fulfilled. Myrtle, we can't keep doing this. You are my sister and I want to help you, but I don't think this is helping. You have to get your life together. Get a job. Keep the job. Make good financial decisions. Myrtle was beyond frustrated with this response. That's easy for you to say. You've always been the lucky one. She started to storm out angrily. Wait, Ivy stopped her. What kind of trip is it? Why is it so important? It is the most important trip I could ever take in my life. Literally, this would solve all of my problems. I have found something that will get my life on track. I would be able to pay you back all the money I owe you and then some. Ivy found it hard to say no to her big sister. So, with some reluctance, she wrote her sister quite a large check. She didn't see or hear from her again for an entire year. When she did hear from her, it wasn't good news. Ivy had been contacted by a hospital to let her know that Myrtle had been admitted. She was her emergency contact. Myrtle had always wanted to get married and start a family, but as luck would have it, it just never happened for her. So Ivy was her closest family. She was contacted and told her sister was very sick and she should come soon. So she did. Myrtle was in worse shape than she imagined when she laid eyes upon her. It pained her to see her like this. "Myrtle," she started with tears in her eyes, "where have you been this past year?" Myrtle had very little energy, but she mustered up some to respond. "I've been chasing the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow." "What? What are you talking about?" Weakly, Myrtle continued and finally admitted, after all of these years, what had always bothered her and how it had led her to this moment. "You've always been the lucky one, Ivy. You've had all the luck. Things go your way. They never go mine. And we both know why. It's because of Lori." Ivy was confused. "Who?" "Don't play games with me, Ivy. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Lori, the leprechaun. You met her when you were 6 years old. Ever since then, you have had the successful life with all of the luck that she has given you. I have never been able to even come close to your life. I've spent decades trying to get what you have. I have researched leprechauns and tried to find one of my own. I have never been able to find one in all of the places I searched. I borrowed money from you many times to make these trips. Last year I heard about a place that had sightings and I was sure it was going to pan out. So I borrowed your money again, but again I came up empty. You once told me something when you were a little girl, and I think you were right. You told me Lori was the last one. I think this is true. Lori is indeed the last leprechaun, and wouldn't you know it, you're the one who found her. But, like I've always said, you've always been the lucky one." Ivy was in complete shock by what Myrtle had just told her. "Myrtle, why have you never told me any of this before?" "Why?" she asked. "What good would it have done?" Ivy sat silently for a few moments. "You were the one who told me there were leprechauns in the backyard. I was just a young child and I wanted to believe you. Lori is not the last leprechaun. I made her up. There is no such thing as leprechauns." And those were the last words spoken to Myrtle. She did not respond to Ivy. She stared blankly at the ceiling and eventually went to sleep. That night, her life ended sooner than it ever should have. But Ivy went on to see her children grow up and to enjoy her grandchildren. Her life was long, fulfilled, and prosperous. I mean, after all, she was the lucky one. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, I would appreciate it if you would click the like button. Also, if you are new to the channel, you can subscribe, hit the notifications so that you will not miss any future stories. And also, feel free to leave a comment, whether you like the story or anything else that might come to your mind. You could also email storyteller2023@outlook.com if you have a request for a topic for a future story. Again, thank you for listening, and goodbye.